Chapter 1. The New Girl. Ethan Ramsey reigned supreme at Northwood High, a self-proclaimed monarch of the hallways and the Friday night football games. He wasn't just popular. He was an institution, a force of nature that everyone either revered or feared. He'd been top dog since freshman year, and nobody had dared challenge his position until Sarah Walker arrived. Sarah was 16, with fiery red hair that seemed to defy gravity and a quiet intensity in her eyes that could make even the most confident person feel uneasy. She'd only been in Havenwood, Oregon, for a month, having moved with her mother after her parents' divorce. Havenwood was a small, picturesque town nestled in the foothills of the Cascade Mountains, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else's business. Sarah, however, was an anomaly, a stranger in a close-knit community that didn't readily welcome outsiders. She was used to it. Her mother's job in environmental consulting meant they moved every few years, leaving behind temporary friends and half-finished memories. Sarah had become adept at blending in, at reading the social cues and adapting to new environments. But Northwood High was proving to be a particularly challenging landscape. The first few weeks were a blur of confusing schedules, unfamiliar faces, and the constant, low hum of anxiety that followed her everywhere. She navigated the crowded hallways with her head down, trying to avoid attention, but it was impossible to remain invisible. Her bright hair, her unconventional style, a mix of vintage finds and thrift store treasures, and her quiet demeanor made her stand out like a sore thumb. Ethan noticed her on day one. He was leaning against a locker near the main entrance, surrounded by his usual entourage: Josh, the muscular football player; Emily, the blonde cheerleader; and Ben, the wisecracking comedian who lived to make Ethan laugh. Sarah hurried past, her backpack slung over her shoulder, her eyes fixed on the floor. Well, what do we have here?" Ethan drawled, a predatory glint in his eyes. Josh chuckled. "Looks like we got ourselves a newbie." Ethan watched her disappear into the throng of students. "Let's see how long she lasts." Sarah tried to ignore the stares, the whispers, the feeling of being watched. She knew the rules of this game. Keep your head down, don't make waves, and eventually, they'll forget you're there. But Ethan Ramsey wasn't the type to forget. Her days settled into a monotonous routine. Wake up, go to school, endure the sideways glances and snide remarks. Come home, do homework, and repeat. Her mother, a kind but often distracted woman, was preoccupied with her new job and didn't notice the subtle signs of Sarah's distress. One afternoon, in history class, Mr. Davies, a kindly old man with a penchant for rambling, was lecturing on the Oregon Trail. Sarah sat near the back, sketching in her notebook, trying to block out the world. A crumpled piece of paper landed on her desk. She unfolded it to reveal a crudely drawn picture of a stick figure with bright red hair being chased by a group of shadowy figures. Beneath it was scrawled, "Go back where you came from, freak." Sarah's stomach clenched. She recognized the handwriting. "Ethan." She crumpled the note and stuffed it into her pocket, her hands trembling slightly. That evening, she sat at her desk, staring out the window at the darkening sky. Rain began to fall, blurring the edges of the familiar landscape. She thought about her old friends, the ones she'd left behind in the last town. She missed them terribly, their easy laughter, their shared secrets. Here, she was alone, adrift in a sea of hostility. She picked up her sketchbook and began to draw, pouring her frustration and loneliness onto the page. She sketched a fierce warrior, clad in armor, standing defiant against a horde of enemies. The warrior had red hair, just like hers. As she drew, a sense of resolve began to build within her. She wouldn't let Ethan Ramsey and his cronies break her. She wouldn't let them drive her away. She would stand her ground. She would survive. But she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. Ethan Ramsey had marked her as his target, and he wouldn't give up easily. Chapter 2. The Cafeteria Confrontation. The Northwood High cafeteria was a cacophony of noise and smells, a swirling vortex of teenage energy. Loud conversations, clanging trays, and the aroma of stale pizza filled the air. Sarah hated it. She preferred to eat her lunch in the library, surrounded by the comforting silence of books, but today she was meeting a new friend. Her name was Chloe, a shy, artistic girl with a love for anime and a disdain for the popular crowd. They'd bonded over a shared love of fantasy novels in English class and had quickly become kindred spirits. Chloe understood what it was like to be an outsider. Sarah spotted her at a corner table, hunched over a drawing pad, a half-eaten sandwich beside her. She approached cautiously, a small smile on her face. "Hey, Chloe," she said, sliding into the seat opposite her. Chloe looked up, her eyes lighting up behind her thick-rimmed glasses. "Sarah, I'm so glad you came. I was starting to think I'd imagined this whole thing." Sarah laughed, a genuine laugh that felt good to let out. "Don't worry, I'm real. Just trying to navigate the social minefield that is this cafeteria." Chloe shuddered. "Tell me about it. I swear, sometimes I feel like I need a hazmat suit just to come in here." They talked for a while about books, movies, and their mutual dislike of the school's dress code. For the first time in weeks, Sarah felt like she could breathe, like she wasn't completely alone. Then she felt it, that familiar sense of dread, that prickling sensation on the back of her neck. She looked up and saw Ethan Ramsey standing a few feet away, his eyes fixed on her. He was flanked by Josh and Emily, his usual entourage. Ethan sauntered over to their table, his swaggering gait designed to intimidate. Well, look who it is. The new girl, slumming it with the weirdos." Chloe flinched, shrinking back in her seat. Sarah, however, held her ground, meeting Ethan's gaze with a steady defiance. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Ethan smirked. "Just checking in on our little transfer student. Making sure you're settling in all right. Finding your place, are you?" He gestured around the table with a dismissive wave. "Looks like you found it, all right." At the bottom, Josh and Emily snickered. Chloe's face flushed with humiliation. Sarah clenched her fists under the table. "Leave us alone, Ethan." Ethan leaned closer, his eyes narrowing. "Or what? What are you going to do about it, Red?" He reached out and flicked a strand of her hair. "Maybe I should just help you find some new friends. Friends who actually matter." Sarah grabbed his wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "Don't touch me." Ethan's eyes widened in surprise. He hadn't expected her to fight back. He tried to pull his hand away, but Sarah held on tight. "Let go," he growled. "You let go first," she retorted, her voice low and dangerous. A crowd began to gather, drawn by the confrontation. Whispers rippled through the cafeteria. The air crackled with tension. Ethan glared at Sarah, his face contorted with anger. He could feel the eyes of the entire school on him, watching, waiting to see what he would do. He couldn't back down now. With a sudden jerk, he ripped his hand away from Sarah's grasp, sending her stumbling backward. He raised his hand as if to strike her, but then hesitated, his bravado faltering under the weight of the crowd's gaze. "You're going to regret this, Red," he hissed. "You just made a big mistake." He turned and stormed away, Josh and Emily trailing behind him. The crowd dispersed, leaving Sarah and Chloe alone at the table. Chloe looked at Sarah with a mixture of admiration and fear. "Wow," she breathed. "I can't believe you stood up to him." Sarah's hands were still trembling. "I don't know what came over me. I couldn't let him bully you like that." Chloe smiled gratefully. "Thanks, Sarah. You're a really good friend." Sarah returned the smile, but a knot of anxiety tightened in her stomach. She knew that Ethan Ramsey wouldn't let this go. He would retaliate, and she had no idea what he was capable of. Chapter 3: The Aftermath. The rest of the day was a blur. Sarah felt like she was walking around with a target painted on her back. Every glance, every whisper seemed to be directed at her. She tried to focus on her classes, but her mind kept replaying the scene in the cafeteria, the anger in Ethan's eyes, the weight of his threat. After school, she walked home with Chloe, their conversation strained. Chloe was clearly worried, her usual cheerfulness replaced with a nervous apprehension. "Do you think he'll do something?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Sarah shrugged, trying to appear nonchalant. "I don't know. Maybe he'll just let it go." But she didn't believe it. She knew that Ethan was the type to hold a grudge, to seek revenge. As they reached Sarah's house, Chloe stopped at the curb. I should probably go. My mom's making lasagna, and she gets really mad if I'm late. Sarah nodded, forcing a smile. Okay, I'll see you tomorrow. Chloe hesitated, then reached out and hugged Sarah tightly. Be careful, she said, and call me if anything happens. Sarah watched her walk away, a wave of loneliness washing over her. She was grateful for Chloe's friendship, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was putting her in danger. She went inside the house, which was quiet and empty. Her mother was still at work. She went to her room and collapsed on the bed, staring at the ceiling. She didn't know what to do. She could tell her mother, but she didn't want to burden her with her problems. Besides, what could her mother do? Ethan Ramsey was a powerful force at Northwood High, and she was just a new girl with no allies. She thought about transferring schools, but the thought of starting over again, of facing the same challenges in a new environment, was too daunting. She was trapped. That evening, as she was doing her homework, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from an unknown number. Watch your back, Red. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She didn't reply. She turned off her phone and threw it across the room. She couldn't sleep that night. Every creak of the house, every rustle of leaves outside her window, sent shivers down her spine. She lay in bed, wide awake, listening for any sign of danger. The next day at school was even worse than the day before. The whispers were louder, the stares more intense. Ethan and his friends seemed to be everywhere, their presence a constant reminder of her vulnerability. During lunch, she decided to skip the cafeteria and hide out in the library. She found a quiet corner and curled up with a book, tried to lose herself in the story. But she couldn't concentrate. Her mind was racing, filled with anxiety and fear. She kept imagining Ethan and his friends plotting their revenge, planning to make her life a living hell. Suddenly, she heard a noise behind her. She whirled around, her heart pounding in her chest. It was Ethan. He was standing there, his arms crossed, a smug expression on his face. Looking for a place to hide, Red? He asked, his voice dripping with sarcasm. Sarah stood up, her hands clenched into fists. What do you want, Ethan? Ethan took a step closer, his eyes narrowing. I just wanted to let you know that you haven't seen the last of me. This is just the beginning. He paused, letting his words sink in. You made a big mistake, Red, and you're going to pay for it. He turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing there, frozen with fear. She knew that he was right. This was just the beginning. The war had been declared, and she was all alone. Chapter 4. The Escalation. The following week was a torment. Ethan and his cronies launched a campaign of harassment that was both relentless and insidious. They spread rumors about her, whispered insults as she passed, and vandalized her locker with crude drawings and hateful messages. Sarah tried to ignore it, to rise above the petty cruelty, but it was exhausting. The constant stress and anxiety were taking a toll. She was losing sleep, her appetite was gone, and she was constantly on edge. Chloe did her best to support her, but even she was starting to feel the pressure. She was ostracized by her classmates, who were afraid of being associated with Sarah. One day, after school, Sarah found her bike had been vandalized. The tires were slashed, the seat was torn, and the frame was covered in graffiti. She stared at the ruined bike, tears welling up in her eyes. This was it. This was the breaking point. She couldn't take it anymore. She ran home, sobbing, and burst into the house. Her mother was in the kitchen, preparing dinner. Sarah, what's wrong? Her mother asked, her voice filled with concern. Sarah couldn't speak. She just stood there, crying uncontrollably. Her mother rushed over and wrapped her arms around her. Tell me what happened, she said, her voice soothing. Sarah finally managed to choke out the story, telling her mother about Ethan, the bullying, and the vandalism. Her mother listened patiently, her expression growing more and more grim. When Sarah was finished, she held her tightly. I'm so sorry, honey, she said. I had no idea this was happening. She pulled back and looked Sarah in the eyes. We're going to do something about this. I promise. The next day, Sarah's mother went to the school and met with the principal, Mr. Thompson, a weak-willed man who was more concerned with maintaining the school's reputation than with protecting his students. She told him about the bullying and the vandalism and demanded that he take action against Ethan. Mr. Thompson listened politely, but he was dismissive. "Boys will be boys," he said with a shrug. "I'm sure it's just a misunderstanding." Sarah's mother was furious. "This is not a misunderstanding," she exclaimed. "My daughter is being harassed and threatened, and you're doing nothing about it." Mr. Thompson sighed. "I'll talk to Ethan," he said, "but I can't promise anything." Sarah's mother left the school feeling defeated. She knew that Mr. Thompson wouldn't do anything to help Sarah. Ethan Ramsey was too powerful, his family too influential. That evening, she sat down with Sarah and told her what had happened. "I'm so sorry, honey," she said. "I tried, but I don't think I can do anything to stop him." Sarah nodded, her face pale. She had expected this. She knew that no one would help her. "It's okay, Mom," she said. "I'll just deal with it." But her mother couldn't accept that. She couldn't stand to see her daughter suffering like this. "No," she said. "I'm not going to let him get away with this." She stood up and walked to the window, staring out at the darkening sky. "I have an idea," she said, "but you're not going to like it." Sarah looked at her mother, her curiosity piqued. "What is it?" she asked. Her mother turned around, her expression grim. "We're going to fight back," she said, "but we're going to do it on our own terms." Chapter 5. The Turning Point. Sarah's mother spent the next few days researching Ethan Ramsey and his family. She discovered that his father was a wealthy businessman with a reputation for being ruthless and uncompromising. She also learned that Ethan had a history of bullying other students, but had always managed to avoid serious consequences. She realized that the only way to stop Ethan was to expose him, to reveal his true nature to the entire school. But she needed proof, concrete evidence of his wrongdoing. She decided to set a trap. She enlisted Chloe's help, explaining her plan in detail. Chloe was hesitant at first, afraid of what Ethan might do if he found out, but Sarah's mother convinced her that it was the only way to protect Sarah. The plan was simple. Chloe would wear a hidden camera and record Ethan's next act of bullying. They would then use the recording to expose him to the entire school. The next day at school, Chloe wore the hidden camera, disguised as a button on her shirt. She followed Sarah around, trying to stay close, but also to avoid attracting attention. It didn't take long for Ethan to take the bait. He spotted Sarah in the hallway and approached her, his expression menacing. Well, look who it is," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Still trying to play the victim, Red?" Sarah didn't reply. She just stood there, her hands clenched into fists. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "You know, you're really starting to get on my nerves," he said. "Maybe I should just teach you a lesson you'll never forget." He raised his hand as if to strike her, but then hesitated, glancing around the hallway. He knew that he was being watched. "But not here," he said with a smirk. "I have something special planned for you." He turned and walked away, leaving Sarah standing there, trembling with fear. Chloe rushed over to her, her face pale. "Did you get it?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Chloe nodded, her eyes wide. "I think so. I'm not sure if the audio is clear, but I definitely got the video." They went to the library and reviewed the footage. The video was shaky and the audio was muffled, but it was clear enough. It showed Ethan threatening Sarah, and it was enough to prove that he was a bully. That evening, Sarah's mother posted the video online, on a website that was popular with the students at Northwood High. She also sent it to the local newspaper and the television station. The video went viral. Within hours, it had been viewed thousands of times. The students at Northwood High were outraged. They couldn't believe that Ethan Ramsey, their golden boy, was a bully. The next day at school, Ethan was a pariah. Students avoided him, whispered about him, and glared at him with contempt. Even his friends, Josh and Emily, distanced themselves from him. He was humiliated. His reputation was ruined. He had lost his power. That morning, Mr. Thompson called Sarah and her mother into his office. He was pale and nervous. "I've seen the video," he said, "and I'm very disappointed." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "I'm afraid I have no choice but to suspend Ethan Ramsey for 3 days." Sarah and her mother exchanged a glance. They had won, but they knew that this was just the beginning. Ethan Ramsey was not the type to give up easily. He would be back, and he would be angrier than ever. Chapter 6. The Confrontation. When Ethan returned from his suspension, he was a changed person. The arrogance and swagger were gone, replaced by a cold, simmering rage. He walked through the hallways with his head down, avoiding eye contact, his fists clenched at his sides. He knew that everyone was talking about him, that they were laughing at him, that they had lost all respect for him. He was a pariah, an outcast, a loser. He blamed Sarah Walker. She had ruined his life. She had taken away his power. She had made him look weak. He vowed to get revenge. He would make her pay for what she had done. He would destroy her life, just as she had destroyed his. He spent the next few days plotting his revenge, carefully planning his every move. He knew that he couldn't afford to make another mistake. He had to be smart, cunning, and ruthless. He decided to wait for the right moment, to strike when Sarah was least expecting it. He would lull her into a false sense of security, and then he would unleash his fury. One afternoon, Sarah was walking home from school when she noticed that she was being followed. She turned around and saw Ethan standing a short distance behind her, his eyes fixed on her with a chilling intensity. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She knew that he was up to no good. She quickened her pace, trying to get away from him, but he kept pace with her, his presence a constant threat. She turned down a side street, hoping to lose him, but he followed her. She was trapped. She reached a dead end, a narrow alleyway between two buildings. She turned around and faced Ethan, her hands trembling. "What do you want, Ethan?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes narrowing. "I want you to pay for what you did to me," he said, his voice cold and menacing. "You ruined my life. You made me look like a fool. You took away my power." He paused, his expression growing more and more sinister. "Now it's my turn," he said. "I'm going to make you suffer. I'm going to make you regret the day you ever set foot in Northwood High." He lunged at her, grabbing her by the arm and pulling her towards him. Sarah screamed, struggling to break free, but Ethan was too strong. He pushed her against the wall, his hand covering her mouth to silence her screams. She tried to fight him off, kicking and scratching, but he overpowered her. He was about to attack her when suddenly, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was Chloe. She had been following Sarah, worried about her safety. Chloe ran towards them, screaming at Ethan to stop. She grabbed a nearby trash can and swung it at him, hitting him in the back of the head. Ethan stumbled backward, releasing Sarah. He turned around and glared at Chloe, his face contorted with rage. "You bitch," he screamed. "I'm going to kill you." He lunged at Chloe, but Sarah stepped in front of her, protecting her friend. Ethan hesitated, his anger momentarily checked by the sight of Sarah's defiance. But only momentarily. With a roar, he grabbed Sarah and threw her to the ground. She landed hard, her head hitting the pavement. She lay there, dazed and disoriented, unable to move. Ethan stood over her, his eyes burning with hatred. "This is it, Red," he said, his voice trembling with rage. "This is the end." He raised his foot to kick her, but before he could make contact, a figure jumped on his back, tackling him to the ground. It was Mark, a quiet, unassuming classmate who had always had a crush on Sarah. He had seen Ethan following her and had decided to intervene. Ethan struggled against Mark, trying to throw him off, but Mark held on tight, refusing to let go. A fight ensued, a chaotic brawl of fists and feet. Sarah watched from the ground, her head spinning, her body aching. Finally, Mark managed to subdue Ethan, pinning him to the ground. He pulled out his phone and called the police. Within minutes, the police arrived, sirens blaring. They arrested Ethan and took him away, his face contorted with rage and humiliation. Sarah and Chloe were taken to the hospital, where they were treated for their injuries. Mark was hailed as a hero. The incident made headlines in the local newspaper. Ethan Ramsey was exposed as a violent thug, his reputation ruined forever. Sarah Walker was hailed as a victim, but also as a survivor. She had stood up to a bully and had emerged victorious. the students at Northwood High learned a valuable lesson: that bullying is never acceptable, and that even the most powerful bully can be defeated. Chapter 7: The New Beginning. In the weeks that followed, Sarah's life began to change for the better. The constant fear and anxiety that had plagued her since arriving in Havenwood started to dissipate. The whispers in the hallway faded away, replaced by nods of respect and smiles of encouragement. She was no longer an outcast, but a symbol of hope and resilience. Chloe and Mark became her closest friends, allies in a world that had once seemed so hostile. They spent hours talking, laughing, and supporting each other through the ups and downs of high school life. Sarah finally felt like she belonged, like she had found her place in Havenwood. Ethan Ramsey, on the other hand, was facing serious consequences for his actions. He was expelled from Northwood High and charged with assault. His family's influence could only go so far, and he was ultimately held accountable for his crimes. Sarah never saw Ethan again, but she heard that he was sent to a reform school and later moved away from Havenwood. She didn't dwell on him or his fate. She had moved on, determined to focus on her own future. One day, as she was walking through the hallways at Northwood High, she noticed a new student, a young boy with a timid expression and a backpack that was too big for him. He was being taunted by a group of older students who were making fun of his clothes and his stutter. Sarah stopped and watched for a moment, remembering her own experiences as the new girl. She knew what it felt like to be the target of bullies, to feel helpless and alone. She took a deep breath and walked towards the group of students, her heart pounding in her chest. "Hey," she said, her voice clear and firm. "Leave him alone." The older students turned around and looked at her, their expressions surly. "What's it to you, Walker?" one of them sneered. Sarah stood tall, her eyes blazing with determination. "It's my business," she said. "I won't let you bully him. Not on my watch." The older students hesitated, sensing her resolve. They knew that she wasn't afraid of them, that she wouldn't back down. With a shrug, they turned and walked away, leaving the young boy standing alone. Sarah approached him, her expression softening. "Are you okay?" she asked. The boy nodded, his eyes wide with gratitude. "Thank you," he stammered. "They were being really mean." Sarah smiled. "Don't worry," she said. "They won't bother you again. I promise." She put her arm around the boy and led him away towards the safety of the library. As she walked, she realized that she had come full circle. She had started out as a victim of bullying, but she had become a protector, a defender of the weak. She had found her purpose, her calling. She would dedicate her life to helping others, to standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves. She would become a warrior, a champion of justice, a beacon of hope in a world that often seemed dark and cruel. And it all started with a look, a defiant gaze that challenged the reign of Ethan Ramsey and sparked a revolution that changed Northwood High forever. Epilogue. Years later, Sarah Walker graduated from Northwood High with honors. She went on to college, where she studied social work and became an advocate for victims of bullying. She never forgot her experiences in Havenwood, or the lessons she learned about courage, resilience, and the power of friendship. She dedicated her life to making the world a better place, one act of kindness, one act of defiance at a time. And she always remembered the words of her mother, who had taught her that the greatest weapon against darkness is light, and that even the smallest spark of hope can ignite a revolution. This is just a start in a story framework. I can continue to expand the story, adding more details, subplots, and character development.